Hi guys, Saturday morning, 14th of August. Another real quick one, hopefully. Just covering some of the basis. I done a YouTube stream yesterday covering this in a bit more detail, but just to reiterate, some of the things that I'm actually seeing, why I'm not kind of stressing or panicking or thinking, hey, this is going now straight up to an all-time high. I just wanted to cover some of this. So if we jump straight into what I'm currently seeing, I think before jumping into the charts, it's probably worth me explaining a little bit in terms of Composite Man and what the kind of news outlets are looking for you to see. So, in recent terms, we would have had some positivity. There's a little bit more news. I mean, even Euro USD, myself and Paul, we've been speaking recently around what's actually visible in terms of the news, why these things are hyped, and why, as a professional trader, it kind of doesn't really matter. But when you're looking at Bitcoin, the emphasis is so much on retail, and there's a lot of retail money playing in this with no real clue as in how to play this. So, as a composite man, there is an element of how would you play this game? Why would you play the game this particular way? And creating the rules, creating the strategy, if you will, is basically something that these guys will use the news, they will use the fear, the greed, obviously that emphasis on jumping in and assuming that you can go and make millions of dollars on a small investment. Those days have really gone in terms of Bitcoin. I mean, there might be a lot of altcoins out there that you can strike it lucky with, but I think the whole premise of taking leverage Bitcoin positions is just going to get more and more aggressive in terms of taking these retail trades and traders out of situations. So if you look at this as an example, this was a recent article on CoinDesk, and in essence, what this is talking about is how the IRS are not going to kind of put the emphasis on all of the, I suppose, all of the different definitions of what a broker actually becomes, and therefore retail will see this as absolute positive. And as we've seen from last night's move, and again even mentioned in the article, we've actually gone up in just a couple of minutes, $1,500. Now, why a lot of people might think, oh, well, this is great, this is wonderful, this is what's happening. If we flip across into the COT data, and this is actually something we have within our Discord, the COT data comes out, and it's this one more than anything, the asset managers that we're looking at. Ultimately, the asset manager class, you have to see as the price was moving up, the shorts from asset managers were moving up. And I suppose just to simplify this as a definition, you got to ask yourself, when that price moved from 44K up to 64K, who was the retail buying from? And in correlation to the retail purchasing those Bitcoins, you have to ask, what was the news looking like? What positivity were you seeing in the market? Bitcoin was going to $1 million. I've seen various articles, various posts, gurus talking about 750K, a million K per Bitcoin. And whilst I know that it will get there at some point, as a trader and a trader with lots of experience, you ultimately know that some of these moves need decent corrective moves. And we've covered this with Weiss, we've covered this with Elliott, we've covered this in terms of Wyckoff distribution and back to accumulation. And what you can actually see with this particular chart from a COT perspective is that as this rally was moving on up, these guys were selling out and therefore selling to the retail then ultimately buying that hype. So you now have the news, you have the composite man story, and you ultimately can see why and what for this is actually doing. However, on the flip of this, what we can see in the background in terms of the orange line is we've actually had the very sharp drop off. And again, this accumulation starting to play itself out all the way back from January, realistically. However, in the last 2 weeks, what we've seen is the spike in the buy followed by the drop off, right? So the last 2 weeks being here, and the same thing with this. So we've actually got more shorts occurring for a slightly longer period. If you come down here, we've had more shorts occurring all the way back from the end of July, and therefore it's these shorts are the ones that are actually therefore being accumulated by the composite man, if you will, and this gets a little bit more complex, but the general idea is the chart is now starting to look a little bit more bullish overall, but that isn't the end of the story. So as long as you've got this in the back of your mind, we now have to look at the sentiment as a whole. And one interesting chart that was posted last night within our group was actually this from the visitor section. And you now have, this is just pure retail data. We actually have a 96% long retail. And for me, this composite man game strategy couldn't be any better right now. Okay, so you're angling around a 50k kind of level, and this is possibly the targets. There's a couple of reasons for the targets. I know Paul have covered some of this in his streams. I know the interview I done with Sanjay the other day, Sanjay had around 51k as a potential upside. Personally, I wasn't seeing 50k in this particular move. I was actually looking for more 45k and 45k with a nice drop off at the end of that. So, obviously the hype for me is just overhyped, and therefore, another 2.5, 3k in terms of my expectations on this. Um, I'm not stressing about that right now. I knew it was going up. I just didn't know, we'd get this kind of hype all over again. But news has come in. Lots of people are looking at this going, hey, let's jump on the bandwagon. So what we're actually going to start to see now is we're going to see some of these moves taken out. If we look at this particular first high here, you're going to see me make this a little bit smaller. Right, so what you're going to see is the first move, the next one, which is a red candle, having a slightly higher high than the one before. Okay, so at that particular point, what you've got is new traders coming in long and new traders entering short, because they're assuming at this point, the market has had a nice run. We're looking for the pullback, and therefore on this particular move, you would have had the longs taken out at this level. And from this particular perspective, as people thinking, okay, this is now probably likely to go down quite a considerable amount more, we've had this evil candle straight up and through taking these longs. Now, at this particular point, right, you've now collected both short stops and long stops in this particular kind of swing. And this is only talking about this very, very close move here. You've actually got now stops taken out one way, stops taken out the other way. And what I'd like to see on something like this is another little move again, just slightly above, a liquidity grab before ultimately a bigger dive underneath this liquidity again. And this is basically the end of quite a big game overall, because there's a lot of, I guess, kind of interest in this market in particular. It's probably the biggest viewed instrument that we've seen added to any exchange, added to any product range in the last century, and therefore we've got on-chain analysis, we've got big institutional players watching this, we've got global media watching this, and I suppose every man and their dog watching this. So at the moment, you've got buyers buying this because the postman told them so. You've got institutional buying this in large quantities, kind of behind the scenes, and they're trying to acquire large positions without letting this run too far away from them. And therefore, when you put all this together, you can clearly see that for these guys to still be taking profits, they still need this retail hype in the market. Because I think the feeling 2, 3, 4 weeks ago was actually, are we dead? Are we in a bearish market? And all you have to think is that if the sentiment is looking likely long, it's exactly what Composite Man is looking for you to think right now. And therefore, in this particular move, one of the things we covered yesterday in my stream was, if we look at the characteristics on this particular swing up, without any kind of pullback in this is more of an ABC move rather than an impulsive Elliott, where you'd expect to see a 0 to 1, pullback to 2, impulsive 3, pullback 4, impulsive 5. This doesn't look at the moment like this type of move. We've also got an overbought situation in the stochastic. We've got taper in volume on the way down, which gives us divergence. We've got price action up and volume tapering down. And therefore, I just don't feel that this is really ready to create these new all-time highs at the moment. We can jump straight into the weekly chart. I'm just going to finish this one. Like I said, I'd like to keep this one relatively short. And if we look at the situation on the weekly, even if we do assume that this is a bullish move, just for argument's sake, this would give us the 0 to 1. We'd be likely to see a pullback 2, and the pullback 2 could even be as much as 90% and still be valid for a long position. Impulsive 3, pullback 4, and obviously up to 5. Now, I think around 85, 87 was the target for 5 overall, if we were to assume this being the 3, this being the 4, and ultimately up to 85, 87. I think again we might get some more hype. It might run into just past the 100, but I think 103 is what I've got as a make or break type level up there. Even including and baking in some of this retail hype. But I think for me, there's going to be a lot of broken hearts on the back of this particular move. I think it's going to come unexpected, and it'd be nothing really to see some kind of evil wick, in terms of something like this, where we get a 1 or 2 candle down in this particular move, and then all of a sudden we get a nice sharp wick. It could even come lower again, and I think we could come all the way back where the candle closes something like this, and then ultimately move on up to this. So that wouldn't be a surprise either. I think we currently just entering the overbought position on the weekly as well. So I think given that this is a lagging indicator, as most of them are, we are quite likely to see this particular week close in this particular range, and therefore the daily and the weekly is currently up at the higher levels, the daily with also a false bar. So a slow grind up, shortening of the thrust, and then ultimately that drop down. So like I said, I think for me this is still part of that bigger game right now that Composite Man is wanting this to see. We've got retail at 96% long. The sentiment is extremely bullish. We've got the fear greed index, I think, was something like extreme greed right now, on the chart. And again, that was something that was shared in our Discord just a couple of days back. We've got the games being played in terms of taking out new highs and then dropping down to a low, taking out the low to come back for a new high. And these are all characteristic traits of still being a very dirty, ugly 4 move, 3 to 4 move, rather than a nice impulsive kind of wavy, confident move up, which you'd expect to see an increase in volume rather than a decrease in volume, as we'd obviously get in this. So this is the anomaly at the moment that we're experiencing. This is just something, I think, because of the hype, it's just kind of fueled even more. So that's currently my position on this. I'm quite confident, quite happy with what we've seen. Yeah, a 3K call, slightly annoying in terms of 45 being my overall target up before this move down. But this is Bitcoin, this is crypto, this is kind of Genesis wave overall. And I think there's a lot of things still happening and kind of settling themselves out really. So yeah, that's where we are. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.